didn't ask you for this.
It was something I could fix.
So when it comes to Arcane, we all love to talk about and dissect the many traumas of each and every character. And don't get me wrong, it's incredibly fun to do. And I for one personally love to watch and make those kinds of videos. But recently, since pretty much the beginning of Season 2, I've begun to see many of these broken characters such as Jinx in a more positive way. Almost as if they're healing from the past. So with that thought in mind, I decided to go back and dissect the different ways that Jinx has begun to change for the better. Or at least how she was beginning to change for the better prior to that episode 6 ending. Now Jinx of course is this embodiment of absolute chaos and bad luck. She is this love-starved girl with abandonment issues, PTSD and what seems to be a mild case of schizophrenia. She's arguably the most broken character in the entire series. Someone many were actually saying was too far gone at the finale of Season 1 to ever receive redemption in Season 2. But then in episode 2 of Season 2, it presents her in quite the opposite way. She begins the episode by doing one of the healthiest things anyone who's grieving can actually do. She lets go. She lets go of the memory of Silco in the same river that he and her were both reborn in. Sure, this didn't touch the sides on her trauma that she still carried, but it was one hell of a great start. And if I'm being totally honest, it was actually this moment that would change everything for her going forward. Firstly, by removing that part of her, she was able for the first time in her entire life to just become herself. She was no longer that scared child trying to be strong in front of her big sis, or that almost pretend psychotic maniac scaring away the competition for Silco. She's no longer powder and she's not what we taught Jinx to be anymore. She's now 100% unfiltered, untamed and uncontrolled her. In a way, I'd explain this like she has now truly become Jinx. And that before, that was all almost this false disguise of confidence and her almost pretending to be what she has now become. Which I think is what that whole opening scene was truly trying to point out. Because as we see everyone fighting for their piece of the pie and trying to become the next Silco, she was simply just walking her own path, no longer trapped under someone else's thumb. She is now free to do as she pleases and go wherever she likes. For like I said, the first time in her entire life. Now of course following this, she does meet the best character of all time, as she is running away from some no good thugs on the street, but that's of course a character that arguably plays the most important role in Jinx's life, so we'll come back and talk about her later in the video. Because there's a hell of a lot to talk about when it comes to that angel of a character, and I really want to give it the time it deserves. So with that said, let's just skip ahead just a bit to a point later in the same episode where we see that she met up with what can only be described as Silco's other child, Safika. And honestly, for a scene that could have quickly turned into a brawl in the streets, actually came across as a sweet and touching moment. It was simply just two daughters reminiscing on someone they both loved and missed. But that's not all, as they also spent a great deal of this conversation talking about the future. Sure, this again ended with us seeing that side of Jinx that is connected to her past trauma when she declares that in the future she wants to see the world burn. But for the most part, this whole conversation displayed Jinx and Safika for that matter in an incredibly mature way. Because prior to this and back in Season 1, we saw Jinx as this individual who struggled greatly with moving on and seeing the potentials of the future. Hell, just look at her lair. Inside she had Milo and Clagger, as well as the bunny rabbit that Fi gave her the day everything changed. Not exactly something you'd expect to see in the home of someone comfortable with moving forward. So immediately in Season 2, we're seeing signs of her personal growth. But it doesn't stop there. As if we just skip to the next time that we see Jinx and Safika together, we can clearly see that she has now crafted a new and greatly improved arm for her. An arm that Safika of course used to completely destroy Smeech in one of the coolest fights of all time. Now when confronted by Safika about her not asking for this arm, Jinx didn't just jokingly respond back to her like she normally would. No quick one-liner or crack about her being useless without it. No, she replied with something truthful and sincere. She said that it was something she could fix. Now what makes this interesting is because if you remember, it was actually Jinx who unintentionally destroyed that arm in the past. So this was essentially her fixing and healing a mistake of hers that she made in the past. Again, something that is only possible now because she is healing. I also think it's an incredibly interesting factor that Jinx is this fixer slash healer character, and Fi is this almost bruiser slash breaker character. But yet it's Jinx that we almost see as this destructive force and not Fi. It's a little off topic, but something I just thought was interesting to point out. Now Jinx this season is also heavily involved with the healing of the Undercity, becoming the face of the rebellion, granting people hope for a better tomorrow. Sure, this is something she never wanted or even tried to become, but like most of the things in her life, it happened whether she wanted it to or not. So Jinx is almost unintentionally leading the way to a better song, which I guess is incredibly commendable when you think about it. Now later after Jinx's fight versus Warwick in the prison, she learns that it's actually Fander. and in one of the most positive displays of growth, decides to seek out someone who she knew wouldn't want to see her face, her sister Fi. She knew that showing her face in front of her would likely lead to a fight, which it did, but she also knew that Fi had a right to know the truth about Vander. So like I said, in a display of maturity and growth, she went to her and told her everything, and together they went to help aid the man who always did everything for them. Now annoyingly, even though the two were stuck in this underground mine together with no one else around, they still chose to beat on each other rather than just have a fucking talk. Like maybe it's just me, but I do believe that if Jinx just spoke up about how she feels abandoned and replaced, Fi would begin to understand that Jinx isn't this psychotic monster attacking everyone for no reason. If they just talked, they'd likely heal, and they'd likely grow closer to one another as a result. But sadly, like I said, they chose to beat on each other once again, instead of just talking it out. But now this scene does have something I do want to cover, and that's when Fi said that at least their parents aren't around to see the psycho their daughter had become. And Jinx replied with, "Which one?" Highlighting that as of late, she is now the hero of the Undercity and Fi is nothing but this deadbeat drunk fighting losers in the pits. Basically also highlighting something very important that I, like many of you, have probably seen in this season. And that's as Jinx is healing from the dark pit that she is in, Fi is falling deeper within inside of hers. And like this cover picture would suggest, in the end it will likely be Jinx protecting and saving Fi from her own version of hell. Paralleling how it was Fi who used to protect Jinx in the past, and now it is Jinx who is protecting Fi. This could also just all be a stretch and I could be just making connections where there aren't any, but I do also think that this is a possible route for the future of these girls. So I decided just to mention it. Now next, when Jinx picks Isha up off the ground when Fi broke her nose, we can see a glimpse in Fi's eyes that she sees Jinx in a more positive way. It's very brief and kinda subtle, but it is there, and I do think this is part of the reason why she chose to believe Jinx in that moment when she was fighting Vander. She knew in that moment that Jinx wasn't being totally crazy, and maybe, just maybe, she's actually telling the truth about Vander. Maybe he is trapped within inside this beast. Which of course led to that warm embrace that stole the hearts of everyone watching. Again, Jinx, who is used to cause everything bad for those around her, is now being used to cause something good. Again, showcasing that growth and development that she has been on. Now the next positive display of her character that I want to talk about is when she was presented with the choice between saving Vander and handing over her weapon. She of course chose to hand over her gun, which may seem like a simple choice to make, but for her this gun has become a big part of who she is and almost exists as her comfort blanket. She's never really seen without it, and when she is, it's usually when she's safe and sound within her own home. So handing it over in this moment may seem like a little choice to make, but in my opinion I think it actually meant a lot for her, and once again displayed to me a level of growth that she has now achieved. Now next I want to go back and talk about the impact that was left by Isha in Jinx's life. Because like I said earlier, she has potentially left the biggest impact in her life, and after episode 6, potentially the biggest hole as well. Now in the beginning I do think that Jinx was only slightly fond of her, and I don't think it was until Isha risked her life to save Jinx that Jinx began to truly care about this child. It was after this moment that she started seeing her as her own little sister. Someone who, going forward, she'd want to treat better than how she was treated by her own older sister. Which of course was something Jinx all but said herself when she pointed out how she never did any of these girly things with Fi when she was her age. I also believe that this is why we never see Jinx scold Isha for the dangerous things that she has been doing, despite saying to Silco's chair that she cares for this child and wants to keep her safe. She doesn't scold her or take her on any jobs because that's what she was forced to do when she was growing up, which I believe is another reason why she was against dyeing her hair. Jinx, at her core, still believes that she is the problem for everything, and thinks that Isha should stay as far away from all the chaos as possible. But she also can't help wanting her around, because at the end of the day, she's her friend. She's also the first person who's never judged or asked anything of her in her entire life. She's just someone who likes her for her, which is honestly one of the most beautiful things about their whole relationship. It's true and unfiltered. Isha knows all the dark things about Jinx, and still chooses to love her even despite of it all. Which, when you just think back to how starved for love and attention Jinx was in season 1, just highlights how much Isha must mean to her in this moment. Which also explains why when she thought Isha was lost to her, we saw signs of the old Jinx returning. Because as of right now, Isha is all that's holding her together. Which is incredibly scary to think about when you think about the coming act. Because as we know, it's almost certain that Isha won't be in it. Meaning that once again, Jinx will be on her own. Now what this does is it presents the question of, is Jinx healed enough to handle it? Or is she still so fragile that this will refer to all the progress that her and Isha made during their time together? Maybe it's through their shared grief that her and Fi will once again grow closer to each other. Because remember, in this moment, Vi has also lost her dad all over again. So by sharing in their grief and despair, and by not pushing each other away this time, maybe we will see that Isha's final sacrifice will act as the final act of healing for Jinx and Vi's relationship, which I just think would make for the perfect end to this heartbreaking journey between both sisters. But now, of course, none of this video is meant to ignore the fact that she is still suffering with trauma. Because honestly, no matter what happens, she likely always will. It's just that throughout most of the season, she has displayed areas where I can almost see a day where she puts the past in the past and moves on with her life. Sure, that's about to become a hell of a lot harder following the ending of episode 6, but it's something I still believe is possible, though I do realize I am likely alone in that thought. But now with all of that said, that's going to do it for me in this video. So I put the rest to you. Is Jinx healing, or is what happened at the end of episode 6 going to revert her all the way back to what she used to be? Tell me all that in the comments down below, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. But now with all of that said, have a great day or night wherever you are, and peace.